The first thing I wanted to note is that in Mark chapter 3, the crowd is a big character in this drama. A little earlier, Mark 3:7 told us, Yeshua withdrew to the sea with his disciples, and a great multitude followed him. So what was happening in Mark 3 is that the more that Messiah ministered, the more this crowd kept pressing in upon him. And of course, he was healing people. He was casting out demons. In verse 11 and 12, it says, the unclean spirits, whenever they saw him, fell down before him and cried, "You are the Son of Elohim." He sternly warned them that they should not make him known. So try to picture this as to what was really going on with this crowd. Not only were there people who had physical illnesses that he was healing, but there were a lot of people that had demons. And these demons were not quiet. They were harassing him. Now, how do you think they did that? Why, they did it through the people. They spoke out of the mouths of these people. That's how they did it. If you saw that happen, would you understand that's a demon talking? Or would you think that's just the people talking? You see, there's a certain level of discernment in even understanding the story, isn't there? Two people could be standing there watching all this happen. And from one point of view, they're just seeing this unruly crowd. From a spiritual point of view, they can see the influence of the demons in that crowd. I think that's something to take note of, because I think that is still happening. You know what? The truth is, a lot of people are demonized, and it's increasing. You go out shopping, and there are demonized people around you. You can go anywhere almost out in the world. There are people who are practicing witchcraft. There are people who are involved in sorcery and all kinds of demonic activities. And the demons are an influence, and they know who you are. They knew who he was. They know who you are. Do you know who they are? Don't you think that would help to know who they are? Yeshua certainly did know who they were. And think of this now demon-infested crowd following Yeshua around and what that must have been like. It wasn't really a pleasant thing, was it? You don't have peace with a group of people where a lot of them are infested with demons. It's not a peaceful place. Here we have Yeshua with his disciples whom he called to him in the mountain. Why are they in the mountain? Well, they had left the crowd. They're trying to do some business for the kingdom apart from this constant clamor of the crowd. And it tells us in these verses that he appointed 12 of these disciples, and he gave them authority. And he sent them out. And by the way, that is the root meaning of the word apostle, one who is sent out. He sent them out to proclaim. And to proclaim what? Why, we keep finding it through the Gospels, to proclaim the kingdom, the good news of the kingdom. You see, they were representatives now of the kingdom. They had been appointed as representatives of the kingdom. And in verse 15, he gave them authority. So they weren't free agents who were doing their own thing. They were representatives of Messiah and of the kingdom, and they had authority from him to heal and to cast out demons, to do what he was doing. And it goes forward there and it names them. What's really happening here? Well, we're seeing Messiah coming to grips with the spiritual forces of darkness. And that was really an immense force there in Israel. There were many people who were under the influence of demonic powers. And here now, for the first time, he is appointing other people to do what he is doing. And he's giving them authority to do it. Now, it doesn't mention it here, but of course, we know what happened. And that is, he knew he was going to be going back to his Father in heaven. And he was leaving these 12 to carry forward the light of the kingdom into the world. And that is what happened. So I represent that as him lighting a light, raising up a light against the darkness that was in Israel at that time. Next, it tells us he came into a house, and the multitude came together again, so that they could not so much as eat bread. So here he is, coming into a house, and here's the multitude with such a clamor that he and his apostles can't even eat. Now, we think about Yeshua as the Son of God. You might think he's like some kind of a super being or something, but you know what? He needed to eat too, because he was a man, and certainly his apostles needed to eat. And so how much consideration is the crowd giving to him and giving to the apostles? It goes on, it says, when his friends heard it, they went out to seize him, for they said, he is insane. Now, this verse itself seems kind of crazy, doesn't it? As we look at this passage, it says he came into a house. What house is that? What are these friends who want to seize him? And who is it that's calling him insane here? Well, let's look at what has been said about this in the past. Here's the New American Standard Bible, and this kind of helps us. It says he came home. So the Greek phrase into a house is really an idiom that means to come home. This is his family home. Why do you think he would come home with this crowd following him by the seashore to the mountains and now even to his house? If you've got people following you everywhere you go, even out into the wilderness, where will be your final retreat? Isn't it going to be your home, maybe your family, looking for a place of some peace and rest? That's where you would go. So that's where he actually went. He went home to his family. And the very fact that he did that tells you what about his relationship with his family? Obviously, if he's seeking some peace and security at home, he's on good terms with his family, right? Well, let's continue on. Here's Robertson's word pictures, what it says about his friends here. It says his friends. The phrase means literally those from the side of him. In other words, those on his side. What does it mean to you when you say, someone on my side? It probably means to you, someone who's on your side, right? Someone who's supporting you, somebody who agrees with you. That's what the term actually means. And it goes on here saying, this most likely means his kin people or family. So he comes home. Then there's these people who are on his side, most likely his family. What are they doing? Well, Mark 3:21, when his friends heard it, they went out to seize him, for they said he is insane. Well, that sounds kind of weird, doesn't it? Doesn't sound like it fits with the story. And then in Mark 3:31 it said, his mother and his brothers came, and standing outside, they sent to him, calling him. Vincent's commentary says his friends are his mother and his brethren, they who were from beside him. And then it says, it is a mournful spectacle to think of the mother and brothers saying, he is beside himself. In other words, he is crazy. So this is the standard idea of what this means, that his family is going out to get him because they're embarrassed about him and all this crowd, and they're calling him crazy. And you find this everywhere. Virtually all the commentaries say that's what's happening here. The only thing is, he's referring to his family here, or Mark is, by a term that says they're on his side or they're supporting him. So it's very contradictory. Here they're supporting him. Here he's gone home to his family because he's seeking solace from the crowd, but then they're calling him insane? That doesn't make sense. And the reason it doesn't make sense is from the book of Luke and everything else we know. Remember what happened in the book of Luke? The angel came to Mary. In Matthew, we learned how the angel came to Joseph, right? And announced the coming of Messiah, the coming of his birth. Well, he did the same with Mary in Luke. The angel of God told Mary that her son would be the Son of the Most High God and that he was the King of the kingdom. She told him she was a virgin, and the angel told her the child would be born by the Holy Spirit. And then Mary said, behold, the handmaid of Adonai, be it to me according to your word. So, is this not the cornerstone of Mary's life? Is this not the cornerstone of that family? Do you think Yeshua's brothers and sisters grew up totally forgetting this? Do you think Mary had a lapse and totally forgot this and said that Yeshua was crazy? Boggles the mind, doesn't it? How do people even come up with stuff like that? That's impossible to believe. So what really happened? Well, in the New American Standard Bible, it helps a little. It says, when his own people heard of this, they went out to take custody of him, for they were saying he has lost his senses. It wasn't Mary and the brothers that were saying he lost his senses or he was crazy. It was the crowd, or some people from the crowd, that were the ones that were saying that about Messiah. In other words, the crowd and the atmosphere was intensifying. And when people start yelling at you, telling you you're crazy, what comes next? Could be physical violence, right? What would your family think if they thought you were about to be mugged by a mob? If they loved you, wouldn't they want to come and get you? That's what really happened. That's what they wanted to do. So they had heard about this. Maybe a neighbor or something said, hey, this is going on, you know. And so they went out because they wanted to take him away from this situation because he was being called crazy out there. So instead of being the bad guys that didn't believe in Messiah, they were the good guys that were trying to support Messiah in his ministry, even in this difficult situation. Now, it goes on, it tells us about the scribes coming down from Jerusalem, saying, by the prince of the demons, he casts out the demons. This is all telling us what's at the heart of all of this. You know, we start out with Yeshua casting out the demons. He gives the apostles authority to cast out demons. The demons are very unruly. They're creating this atmosphere in the crowd. It's likely that these scribes were part of that crowd, and I think even part of the demonized people in the crowd. They were getting at what the heart of this really was. You see, it was about Yeshua and the 12 casting out demons. So this is why some of the people in the crowd were saying that he was crazy, probably the demonized people. And now these scribes were standing up, backing that up, basically, saying that Yeshua was casting out the demons by the power of Satan. This was escalating, wasn't it? So Yeshua didn't like where that was going. So he summoned these men, these scribes that were saying this, and he directly confronted what they said. And basically what he showed is, why would Satan support a person who is working against Satan? That's not logical. It's easy to see that that's wrong. It's talking here about a kingdom divided against itself, or a house divided against itself, that it cannot stand. In this country, in America, we have exactly that situation. A country, a kingdom divided against itself. Some people think, okay, one side is going to win and the other side is going to lose. According to Yeshua's words, that's not how it's going to work out. The division itself will cause the house or the kingdom to topple. That's what Messiah is saying. That is where things will end up. In America, in any house that is completely divided, and, may I add, in the church. The church thinks they're going to be raptured off before the tribulation, and yet when you look at the church, what do you see? A house divided against itself, divided up among hundreds of denominations, very much divided against itself. What does Messiah say about that? It cannot stand. It will collapse. it's going to happen. But getting back here, I'd just like to mention verse 27. It says, "No one can enter into the house of the strong man to plunder unless he first binds the strong man, and then he will plunder his house." I love that verse. I'm going to tell you why I love it. Yeshua Messiah was not just playing a defensive ball game. He wasn't just engaging with the darkness to defend himself. He wanted to plunder Satan's house. Do you get the difference? Do you understand why they were all clamoring against him, calling him crazy, saying that he was from Satan? The very people who were from Satan were saying he was from Satan. Does that all sound familiar? It's because he was bringing it to the enemy. He was binding the strong man so he could plunder his house. And that's what he was doing. Out of that unruly crowd, okay, there were people responding to Yeshua Messiah. Yeshua was binding demons and he was plundering Satan's house, setting people free to be part of the kingdom. I think that's pretty cool. In fact, I think it's so cool, it's exactly what I want to do. It should be exactly what every follower of Yeshua Messiah wants to do. We want to plunder Satan's house. Don't you agree? Well, next it tells us, after all of this, it tells us his mother and his brothers came, and standing outside, they sent to him, calling him. So why are they there? They'd been out trying to find him to save him from the crowd, and it turns out he's at home all along. And so finally they come home looking for him, only to find out that apparently the house is so besieged by this multitude, they can't even get in their own house. So they're calling from the outside to Messiah. Meanwhile, inside, it says a multitude was sitting around him, and they told him, "Behold, your mother, your brothers, and your sisters are outside looking for you." Well, the first thing we know here is a multitude cannot fit inside a house, right? So this is not the entire multitude. This is some of the people from the multitude. Those people whom Yeshua Messiah admitted to the house. In other words, those ones that he considered deserving of coming into the house and sitting with him and talking with him. That's who they were. So this is not the unruly people from the crowd. These are the ones that Messiah wants to give his attention to. These are the ones who are responding to Messiah and the kingdom message. And so these are the good people that care, right? And therefore, when they see that Messiah's family is outside dutifully looking for him to render aid to him, they tell Messiah, "Hey, your family's out there calling you." So what do you think is happening with his family? Is what they're doing a good thing or a bad thing? Are they trying in some way to make Messiah look bad or to stop him from what he's doing? Or are they just trying to render him aid that they think the crowd has caused him to need. What do you think about that? Well, the commentaries assume they're doing something bad. They can't really tell us what's bad about it, because what's so bad about your family caring about you? But that's how they see it. And this is where Messiah speaks up. He says to these ones who are sitting with him and are telling him about his family, he says, "Who are my mother and my brothers?" Looking around at those who sat around him, he said, "Behold, my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of Elohim, the same is my brother and my sister and mother." So let's take a closer look at this. You know, there's two ways to see this. And for a very long time, the standard line about this has been very negative to Yeshua's family. It's as if he's kind of shaming them in some way. So is this a slam against his family, as if they're not doing the Father's will? Well, let's recap. When he's wanting a place of security from the crowd, where does he go? To his family. They're described as being the ones who are by his side. That sounds like they're supporting him. And they're going out to help him. And that's why they're there. And they're showing an interest in him and in his welfare. So, for what reason would he be slamming them? Could it be that when he says, "Who are my mother and my brothers," what could he really be saying? Who are they really? Look at them. Who are they? In other words, what kind of people are they? Pointing out their devotion to him and to his Father, their oneness with him, their support of him. Perhaps when he says, "Who are my mother and my brothers?" he's saying, look at them. I'm proud of them. They're my family. And then he says, looking around at those who sat around him, he said, "Behold, my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of Elohim, the same is my brother and my sister and mother." Okay, so some people see this as criticizing his family. But could he really mean this? Could he really be saying to them, "You're like my mother and my brothers if you do the will of the Father like they do"? In other words, pointing to his family as an example of people who are doing the Father's will and saying, everyone who does that is part of my family. That's how I see it. What was the big concern going on right at that time? Well, 7 verse 1 mentions this concern, even though in John 6 it didn't really talk about it much. But it says, after these things, Yeshua was walking in Galilee, for he wouldn't walk in Judea because the Judeans sought to kill him. So in John, it's just setting it forth as a fact without giving all the backstory. I think the reason for that is because the backstory is in other places like Matthew chapter 16, and that had already been written, and so it didn't need to be repeated. Let's look at Matthew 16 and see if it speaks to this issue at all. As you read through Matthew 16, you get to Peter's confession, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living Elohim." And then it's narrated after that happens, says, from that time, Yeshua began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders, chief priests, and scribes, and be killed, and the third day be raised up. So what we see here, it was right during this time, just before John 7 starts, that Yeshua started telling his disciples, essentially, there's a plot to kill me, and it's going to happen. They're going to kill me, and then I'm going to be raised from the dead on the third day. That's what he started to tell them. So, clearly, this was a big thing on his mind, and it was a big thing on their minds. So, from the information we have so far, we want to ask the question, did Yeshua's disciples believe in him? And of course, John 6:69 says, we have come to believe and know that you are the Messiah, the Son of the living Elohim. And considering so many had left and they stayed, we have to accept this confession as a real confession of what they believed. They believed that he was the Messiah and the Son of Elohim. And yet, we ask the question, did Yeshua's disciples believe there was a plot by the religious leaders to kill him, that they would succeed, and that Yeshua would be raised from the dead? And the answer is clearly no, they didn't believe that. When I see that, my head goes like that. Because so many people think that belief or faith is monolithic. It's like a big rock in the middle of the room. It is what it is. But belief doesn't work like that for people. Belief doesn't work like that. You can come to believe in Yeshua as the Messiah and yet not believe everything he says. And you know what? I don't even want to say that to you, but I have to because it's true. It's what happened with his disciples. Because right after Yeshua said what he said to his disciples, told them what was going to happen, Peter took Yeshua aside, okay? Peter is taking Yeshua aside. The student is taking the master aside. And basically saying, you just made a big mistake. That'll never happen to you. That couldn't possibly happen to you. Did Peter believe it? Clearly, Peter did not believe it. And I think the reason he didn't believe it is because the fact was so clear to him that Yeshua is the Messiah and is the Son of God, that it's unthinkable that these things could happen to the Messiah and the Son of God. So because of that, he doesn't believe what the Messiah just said to him. Is that logical? People aren't logical. I'm sure that's not a big news flash, is it? Okay. How long did this unbelief in the plot to kill Yeshua and in his resurrection thereafter last with the disciples? Well, we're going to follow this as we go through the book of John, but here's one place. We're in John 6 right now. We're moving ahead now to John 16. A lot's happened by the time you get to John 16. His disciples said to him, behold, now you speak plainly and speak no figures of speech. Now we know that you know all things and don't need for anyone to question you. By this we believe that you came forth from Elohim. Yeshua answered them, do you now believe? They did believe, but you know what? Their belief was iffy. And just now they're getting to the place of saying, oh, you don't need anybody to question you. So obviously, up to now, they weren't totally on board with his program, right? They believed who he was, but they weren't believing everything he was saying. And so they continued to be questioning him. And now they say they believe, but then Yeshua says, do you now believe? And then he goes on and tells them, you will be scattered, everyone to his own place. You will leave me alone. So their belief, though real, was far from perfect faith. Far from perfect faith. And then, amazingly, in the very last chapter of Matthew, the resurrected Yeshua Messiah is appearing to the 11 disciples, and it tells us some doubted. Doubted. Doubts. They had doubts. Yeshua Messiah, the resurrected Yeshua Messiah, holds in his hands and feet, scar in his side, hem in his body is standing in front of them, and yet some doubted. Is this really that shocking? Do you have perfect faith? You read the Bible, you read the same word that I read. And if you've been moving along with us here at Zion for any length of time, you've read a lot of verses that talk about the second Exodus, that say it's going to happen, that the remnant out of all the nations are going to be drawn out of all those nations and are going home in the remnant Exodus. Do you believe it? A lot of people have doubts. A lot of people say, well, you know, when you're ready to go, give me a call. I'm not going to, by the way. I'm not going to call you. Not like that. Not if you just disappear and do your own thing, and then if it happens, you want me to call you. I'm not sure that those are the people that Yeshua wants to bring home in the second Exodus. What do you think? That's a lot like the people in the first Exodus, isn't it? And how did that work out for that generation? So really, on the one hand, we look at this and we say, oh, this is really something that the disciples doubted and all of that. This is what's normal. I'm not saying it's what's right or good. I am telling you, with fallen human beings, this is what is normal. We just mentioned the whole generation that Yahweh took out of Egypt. What did they see? Right? The amazing 10 plagues that Yahweh brought on the gods of Egypt. They saw Yahweh with a strong hand deliver them. They saw the Red Sea parted. And they were delivered. And after that, time after time after time, they would not believe what Yahweh said. We must come to grips with this issue of doubts. Because doubting can cause the ruination of your life. If you think of what happened to that generation that came out of Egypt, that's a perfect example, right? Because they could have had this glorious testimony where they entered into the promised land, took the promised land as their own, had those homes to live in, had a wonderful life, and glorified Yahweh by what they did. And instead, because they doubted, they lost it all. And they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years until they died. Were they Yahweh's people? They were. They were Yahweh's people. They knew Yahweh was real. But that's not the same, is it, as doing his will? So they missed out. So this is an issue. You know, the fact that people have doubts. On the one hand, we can expect people will have doubts. Some people will have doubts. But on the other hand, it's pretty scary. It's pretty scary as to what it can mean, and especially where we're at in the stream of time right now. Well, there's some more. Getting back to John 7:1. As we begin, Yeshua knew of the plot by the religious leaders of Judea to kill him and was avoiding them because it was not yet his time. Now, what was that like for Yeshua at that point in time? Because he knew it, but he seems to be the only one that believed that this was the situation. His disciples couldn't come to grips with that, and so they couldn't believe that was the case. What was he going to do? What would you do? What if you are a person and you know some life-changing fact, but everyone around you ignores that? Are you going to do what they want, or are you going to do what that fact calls for? A lot of us don't have that strength in ourselves where we will do the right thing against the opinion of others around us. And that's a challenge, and it's something we really need to think about. This is what Yeshua did. He knew this plot was a reality, and he had to deal with it accordingly, even though those around him, his closest men, were iffy about it, had doubts. In John 7:2-4, we have Yeshua getting advice from his brothers. It says, "Now the Jewish festival, the feast of Sukkot, was at hand. His brothers therefore said to him, 'Depart from here and go into Judea, that your disciples also may see your works which you do. For no one does anything in secret, and himself seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, reveal yourself to the world.'" Is this advice a statement of belief or unbelief in Yeshua as the Messiah? Some people say that this is Yeshua's brothers mocking him. But to me, statements like "the works you do, reveal yourself to the world," are evidence to me that they believed in who he was. Just like the disciples, by the way, just like Peter confessed him as the Messiah, that they believed in him as who he was. But they had a different standing with him because they were his family. They were his brothers. And if you have brothers, sometimes your brothers can get a little pushy with you, telling you what you ought to do. And that seems to be what was happening here. Well, what else have we got here? Some facts about Yeshua's family. The biggest thing we find here in John chapter 2 is that Yeshua's family were involved in his ministry from its very beginning. His ministry began actively with his miracle at the marriage feast in Cana. And if you remember right, his mother basically launched that miracle, right? She says to Yeshua, Yeshua, they have no wine. She's expecting him to do something about it. Why would you think Yeshua's mother would be any different than your mother? Right? She's acting exactly like a mother. That's not a big surprise because Yeshua was part of a real family. Is there anything about that statement, though, that says she didn't believe in Yeshua? Or is it not exactly the opposite? Is it this very statement a statement of faith? Like, Yeshua, I know you're the Messiah and you can do something about this. Isn't that right? And you know what? As you read through the scriptures, you read through the prophets, what you're going to find is Yahweh loves it when people do this. For instance, what about Abraham challenging Yahweh and says, well, what if there's 10 righteous men in the city? Are you still going to destroy all those people? That's a statement of faith, not unbelief. That's a statement of a person who's in a real relationship with Yeshua, the pre-existent Yeshua, who feels free to speak his mind. Isn't that what it means in John chapter 4 when it says the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth? You don't have to be afraid to say the truth of how you really feel to Yeshua. And I will tell you this, if you're wrong, he'll tell you. He'll let you know. But he won't harm you because you have an opinion. Here, he set his mom straight about this. But the point is, his family was involved. Now, there in John 2, it goes on, it says, this is the beginning of his signs. It mentions that the signs revealed his glory. Glory as whom? The Messiah, the Son of God. It says his disciples believed in him. And then it says he went down to Capernaum, he and his mother, his brothers, and his disciples, and they stayed there a few days. Yeshua's ministry started with his family as a part of it. So obviously, they were not opposed to Yeshua, to his ministry, or what he was doing. They, in fact, were a part of it. They felt they had a personal stake in it. And they acted like a family, and they let him know what they thought. That's what families do. Well, after this, we have this comment, for even his brothers didn't believe in him. Well, some people really like to run down Yeshua's family. And this is one of the verses they like to point to. Oh, see that? His brothers didn't believe in him. Even though in the same book of John, over and over again, it's telling us that the disciples didn't believe in him. So somehow it's okay they didn't believe in him, but it's bad that Yeshua's brothers didn't believe in him. But in what sense did they not believe in him? Did they not believe that he was the Messiah? Well, look at Yeshua's answer. It says, Yeshua therefore said to them. So the word therefore means that Yeshua is responding in context to the situation. That's very important. Yeshua therefore said to them, my time has not yet come, but your time is always ready. The world can't hate you, but it hates me because I testify about it, that its works are evil. You go up to the feast. I'm not yet going up to this feast because my time is not yet fulfilled. Having said these things to them, he stayed in Galilee. So you notice in Yeshua's comments, there's zero about saying, well, you should believe that I'm the Messiah. You don't believe that I'm the Son of God. It's not about that at all. Yeshua is talking about this issue having to do with going to the feast or not going to the feast. They didn't believe what Yeshua said about the plot, just like the disciples. And so they're telling him to do something different than what he knows he needs to do because he does know this plot is real. That's really the unbelief that it's talking about. So it's a limited thing. It's not believing something Yeshua said. Basically, what they were doing is sharing a strategy. And how I read this is they expected Yeshua to go up with them to the feast. And that's how it was normally done. Families normally went together to the feast, particularly the men. All the men were required by Scripture to go to the Feast of Sukkot. And so, no doubt, these brothers, along with Yeshua, had a history of going to Sukkot. So it probably feels really strange that Yeshua is saying, I'm not going to Sukkot with you. Kind of a little disagreement. Not shocking at all. We should remember about his brothers. We have this event in the book of Acts, chapter 1, and this was after the resurrection. The disciples, including Yeshua's brothers, his family, watched him ascend up into the sky. Then after that, they all returned to Jerusalem together, and they were gathered together there. It tells us who was there in that upper room at this time. Now realize the Holy Spirit had not yet been poured out upon them. It says they went up into the upper room where they were staying. That is Peter, John, Jacob, Andrew, Philip, Thomas, Bartholomew, Matthew, Jacob, the son of Halphi, Simon the Zealot, and Judah, the son of Jacob. That's the 12 apostles, so actually 11 at that time. All these, with one accord, continued steadfastly in prayer and supplication, along with the women and Mary, the mother of Yeshua, and with his brothers. So it's pretty clear that the disciples and Yeshua's family are all in one accord together, praying after they saw this. Clearly, they're believers. And as we go along, in the scriptures, we find the books of James and Jude. These are Yeshua's brothers, Bible writers. And of course, James was the leader of the Nazarene movement that was headquartered in Jerusalem. So I think it's a misreading of things to say that his family were not believers. So we have this conundrum again that people have trouble with. How could the disciples and Yeshua's family believe in him while not believing everything he said? And the reason is there are different levels of belief. It's interesting, Yeshua, when teaching, mentions how Yahweh takes care of everybody, how he even clothes the grass of the field, the birds, and so on. And he says, why don't you believe that he'll take care of you, you of little faith? See, it's possible to have just a little faith. don't put down a little faith. Because Yeshua said, if you have faith like the grain of a mustard seed, you can say to this sycamore tree, be uprooted and be planted in the sea, and it would obey you. Even a little faith has power. That might be the faith that people have when they first come to faith in Yeshua as Lord. They put faith in that. But when they do they have faith in everything that he said? They probably don't even know and understand everything that he said. Now, here we have an example of levels of faith. This is in Numbers 11. And we find in Numbers 11 that early in Moses' ministry, Yeshua said things to Moses that even Moses couldn't believe. And basically what Yeshua said is he was going to feed the whole nation of Israel for a month. So much meat that they couldn't even stand it anymore. So Moses is responding to what Yahweh had said. Moses said, the people among whom I am are 600,000 men on foot, and you said, I will give them flesh that they may eat a whole month. Shall flocks and herds be slaughtered for them to be sufficient for them? Shall all the fish of the sea be gathered together for them to be sufficient for them? Yahweh said to Moses, has Yahweh's hand grown short? Now you will see whether my word will happen to you or not. Guess what Moses saw happen? That's what builds faith. When you actually walk with Yahweh, you will have doubts. He will tell you things, and you're going to think, how could that possibly happen? And then you'll be shocked when it happens. And when you see this happen enough times, your faith increases. This experience with him over time increases your faith until you get to the place that, if he tells you something that nobody else would believe, you'll believe it because you have this experience with him. This is what happened to Moses. As Moses walked with Yahweh and saw him always keep his word, even when it seemed totally outrageous, he still kept his word. Moses came to believe every word. Every word. He didn't have to know how it was going to happen. He got to the place where he stopped asking the questions, like, Lord, how is that going to happen? He didn't say that anymore. He didn't know how it would happen, except that Yahweh said it, so it would happen. Well, it's great to have a strong faith, but it's even better to have a perfect faith. That's the highest level of faith, a perfect faith. Now, I'm sure we all would realize that Yeshua had perfect faith. But it's hard to think that imperfect people could have perfect faith. And we are imperfect. And yet, it is possible to grow to a place where you have perfect faith. That can happen. I think our example of someone who's an imperfect person with a perfect faith would have to be Abraham, wouldn't it? Yahweh tested him, tested his faith, until Abraham got to the place that whatever Yahweh said or required of him, Abraham believed him and would do it. That's what perfect faith is. Deuteronomy 18:13 says, you shall be perfect with Yahweh, your Elohim. It's talking about perfect faith, commanding us to have perfect faith. It wouldn't command you to have perfect faith unless it's possible. Proverbs 4:18, but the path of the righteous is like the dawning light that shines more and more until the perfect day. That's how it works. As you move along with Yahweh, as you get to know His Word better and better, it's like the dawning light. It keeps getting brighter and brighter. Your faith keeps increasing and increasing until it's the perfect day. It's fully surrounded in light. Job 13:15, I like how the King James Version puts it. Job says, though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. I believe that's perfect faith. That, by the way, is the faith of Yeshua Messiah, right? Because he knew it was the Father's will to slay him. And yet he trusted in him. What an amazing example of perfect faith. Do you know that there were others that followed Yeshua that had the same faith? Paul knew the end that he was going to come to, and some in Ephesus tried to prevent him from putting himself in the situation where those things would happen. And yet, knowing it would lead to his death, he went forward, knowing it was the will of his Father. He continued to trust him, even knowing how things would end up. That's a perfect faith. In summary, we found that Yeshua's brothers, like the disciples, could not believe in the imminent death predicted by Yeshua. They just couldn't believe that would happen to him. However, they did believe in him as the Messiah and showed it by supporting him from the start of his ministry in Cana all the way through his death and resurrection, and thereafter as leaders of the early Messianic assembly. The story from Mark 3 reveals demons in the crowd seeking to harass him. A demon-infested and needy crowd, some of whom were calling him crazy and chasing after him so that he could hardly eat a meal, although there were some worthy ones among the crowd. And we have the scribes who attributed his power over demons to the devil. So this is the battleground that Messiah was dealing with. And not an easy thing to be doing, to deal with, but he was dealing with it very effectively. On the other side, we have the kingdom power of Messiah to cast out the demons. We have Messiah giving the 12 kingdom authority against the darkness that would remain even after he was gone. That's very important. And we have Messiah's family, who had a personal interest in his kingdom mission and whom he pointed to as examples of those who do the Father's will. So we have here now a company that has formed in this battle against the darkness that he has formed, and that is Messiah himself, Messiah's family, and the apostles whom he appointed. Now, we often hear Messiah's family did not support him during his ministry. This is incorrect if we understand these verses correctly, and inconsistent, because on the one hand, we have Mary saying, behold, I'm Adonai's handmaiden, and then we have her saying to Messiah that he's crazy. That doesn't make sense. And then after the resurrection, now she's a believer along with the family. So for some reason, we have the family believing in the beginning, we have them not believing, and then later on, we find them clearly in the book of Acts and elsewhere believing. That's not the story. Where did that come from? Well, history shows that Messiah's family actually were leaders of the Messianic assembly in the first century and continued to be into the second century when there was a schism of the Gentiles and a rebellion against Messiah's family and against the entire Hebraic nature of that whole Messianic movement. In other words, they were starting something new. So, who represented the opposition to those people? Was it not Messiah's family? So it was during this period from the 2nd century to about the 4th century where all this negativity was created against Messiah's family. And we have quite a few of the church fathers that are very negative towards them, presenting them in this light as not believing and not supporting Messiah. And they were doing that because they were trying to support their own position as rebels against his family. That's why we have these ideas today. And they have persisted on down through time. Now, once you get past that period and the Catholic Church arises, and now they have undisputed authority and power, they're not fighting against the family anymore. Instead, now they want to make Mary the counterpart of the goddesses that the pagan people worshipped, the Queen of Heaven. So then you have the Catholic Church making Mary the Queen of Heaven and imputing to her all of these godlike powers. So this happened later. And this is why you have this whole jumbled message about Messiah's family. Historically, this is how it all came about. Now, I'm not saying that Messiah's family didn't have challenges in dealing with everything that was going on. If something like this is happening in my family, I can guarantee you I'll be spending a lot of time in prayer, and I'll be struggling to deal with it all. And I think you'd expect that to happen. But what the true story is about them is that Yahweh chose that family to bring Messiah into the world because they had been prepared for that purpose. They knew what they were doing. They gave support to the Messiah, so much so that they were given the leadership over the assembly after he was gone. That's the real picture. And what does all of that mean? What is all that about? Well, what that's all about is a flame, lighting a flame against the darkness. Messiah put this all together. Messiah, his family, the apostles, so that there was an authority structure of unity. You know what he said about a house divided against itself cannot stand? Well, that was true of the Messianic assembly too. And in the 1st century, they were united in this kingdom authority structure that Yeshua, Messiah, and his Father had raised up for renewed Israel. So, just an interesting look at the very beginnings of that starting to form during his ministry.